Okay, great. So I sent a document earlier today about data validation, just a quick little summary of some steps that you can take to run through data validation within your system and use EnvistaARM to accomplish a data validation process. We have a couple SOPs from various agencies that we have some permission to share. So if you have any need for some additional documentation, some specific stuff from actual agencies that are using the system, we can provide a couple varied documents. And we actually invite any agency that's willing to share their documents with the community to send them to us so that we can have that as well. Just as a tool for new users or users who are trying to use the software to its fullest potential. So with the data validation process, as I mentioned in this, there's two phases, and each of those phases has two general steps. Could be three general steps depending on how you're thinking of things. But the phases are going to be simply the first level editing and the second level editing. So that would be the preliminary editors and the final editors. And that's determined by the level that the user who's logging into the system is assigned in Envista setup program. So preliminary editors are going to get the first run at doing an edit to a set of data, and then final editors are, the intention is that they're able to just authorize what the preliminary editors has already done, and then accomplish some additional edits if necessary. Hopefully the final editor doesn't have to do all of the edits, but various network sizes and various other considerations happen so that sometimes it's necessary. So in the editing or in the data validation process, there's really two steps, and three, like I said, if you count data review as its own step. The first step I have here is editing the data and the status of the value. I'm just going to go through this document and then I'll show you examples. So editing the data and status, that's broken down into some subcategories where you first review the data with the reporting tools in EnvistaARM. Then you can review the metadata and integrate those into a unified review. Then you can use the edit table or the edit block to alter the values, the status, the coding, and add notes about your edits, and then saving those changes. The second step, which I think is where, if I had to say anything, I think that we've done webinars on this before, and the general user group knows how to do this. But the validating the data is the step that I think a lot of places are missing, and I'll give you a reason why it's going to be valuable to you at the end of this webinar. But the validating the data would be the second step, and that's just creating a validation record that's in some ways like a bookmark of where you're at with the validation of your data at a given time. So we'll go into how to add a validation record and how to look at the validation history. And then I have some additional topics that we will just touch on briefly, such as the different ways to correct data to a calibration record that you have, and the ability to delete validation records so that you can apply additional edits if new information comes to light. So this is just a one-page document that I did as a quick summary today of what we'll talk about. So I'll move that out of the way so we can focus on looking at some data. So the first step of what I considered editing the data is actually just to look at the data. So as you know, Envista has several tools that are useful for looking at data in tables and as graphs. Certainly I'm not going to go into every report, but since this is just a very quick overview, I'll give an example. We'll run a station report for this month for a selected site of 1 hour data, and we'll just look at it as a table. I think we should have something here. No, it looks like a good bit of data. Spacebar, of course, takes us to the graph. We have the weird graph that's very narrow because we have so many parameters we've selected of various values. So we have a lot of stuff showing up in the graph. Big gap in data. More data here. So this is just a way to look at the data. We can, of course, run it for fewer channels as well. So we'll just run it for, actually that one has the negatives, so we'll do this one. And a spacebar gives us a bit of a graph. So that's a station report. It's a data visualization. Look at the data first, see how it looks, see what things jump out. For me, something that jumped out in that last one was this -106, this -103.
Nathan, I'm sorry, this is Mary in Idaho, and your picture stopped moving, the presentation.
Oh, thanks.
I'm just seeing station report. I'm still seeing that option where you just chose the one. Sorry, I don't know if I'm explaining that very well.
No, I understand. Okay, let me try something. Did it update?
No.
And Mary, it says you're offline now too. It says your connection got lost. I think your internet connection's lost.
Oh, okay. So it's just me then.
Does anybody else have the problem? I unmuted you all so you
good.
Can you see the screen moving?
Yep.
Okay, good. I think it's just Mary. Mary, I think you lost your connection.
Thanks. I'll try and get connected again.
Okay. So these negative numbers seem suspect. In fact, the high values seem suspect too. In fact, you can see it looks like something happened, and there was some repair action here on the 16th at 2 p.m. It's a good time for a repair. So it's a good thing to look at for now. So we can go into look at the metadata, which was the next stage. This is a test station, so I wasn't getting too much in the way of diagnostics and digital monitors. In fact, this instrument, since it has a T, is probably a T-ohm, so it probably doesn't have any of that good stuff anyway. And we were looking at Ellen. Oops. Of course, with other, see, I wasn't even pulling it. With gas analyzers in particular, you'll have diagnostics here. You can look at, review to see if instrument health might be affecting the data values themselves. So that's a possibility. The digital monitor status would be the instrument alarms. Again, I don't know if I was pulling them. We can try to look here. They're not configured. So we won't have those to look at, but those are influenced by the values that you would see in the digital monitor or the diagnostics report. So a digital monitor alarm might be a flow alarm, and then the diagnostics would have the actual flow rate that you were seeing. For this, maybe we have a logbook though. Let's run a logbook report. We can select a station, we'll select Ellen, and we'll just do this month to see if anything is in there. Looks like there is. It's good. And we looked at the 16th, I think I said, the 9th. Yeah, 16 of this month. And looks like some configurations might have been done, although I don't see anything directly related to the PM 2.5 value we were looking at. It's possible that this agency is just using a written logbook that they would have to review independently of Envista. But if they had an entry here, we would obviously see it. All of these entries are generated by Ultimate when things are done to the configuration of the station. So this is actually very helpful that you don't always have to record, I changed a certain field from one value to another. It will log that information for you. So those are the metadata review elements I was talking about, and we can move forward to data editing. Let's say that we've reviewed the metadata and we believe that this data from 15th at 8 until the 16th at 2 is going to be marked as invalid. We'll call it instrument malfunction. So what we'll do is we'll go to the edit table under the edit menu. We will select Ellen, and that was PM 2.5T. We'll look at the 1 hour values. For the, we can just do a period since we know exactly when we're editing for here.
Yeah,
that should work. So we can see right out of the gate there the values that we think are suspect. Looking at it here, obviously there's some high values at the beginning, so we'll just call all of that invalid. One of the things what we could do is just use the spacebar and go to a chart, and you can see where things even out. So you could highlight a big block of area here and do an edit block on that information. Another thing you could do is just highlight it here and do an edit block. So we'll right click and do open edit block. And we're not going to use any filters. We don't need to do that. The date, time, and the channel has already been selected. We don't want to set a value. We just want to change a status. We'll change it to down. And for the description, we'll say instrument failure. And we say OK. It's going to ask us if we're sure. We'll say yes, and it says 34 changes are done, so we'll say OK. So that data set is now marked as down. If we click on show explanation and comment, show edit info, we'll see our comment that we've made, our description listed here. And we can click save. Are we sure we want to save the changes? Yes, of course. We don't have any other time bases, so we can say OK. And now those changes should be reflected in the station report. We can double check that. Oops, I've got the wrong channel. So there we have all of our down channels. Okay, so as an editor, let's say that I've reviewed this month so far and I'm happy with the data for this channel, this PM 2.5T channel. So we can go back to the edit menu, and now this is onto the data validation. We're going to add a validation record. If I were an editor, this step would make it so that other editors could not change the data. Preliminary editor. Other preliminary editors couldn't change the value. Final editors would be able to supersede my edits. If I'm a final, it locks the data from anybody being able to make edits, and that's what that last thing on the document, deleting validation records, that's where that comes in. So to create the validation time period, we're going to click on validation settings. We'll select Ellen, and you can see that there was some data validated quite a long time ago. But we're going to add for this month from the 1st at midnight until the 17th. I guess technically we'll go to the 16th since we didn't do the 17th very much. And we'll just pick that one monitor that we've edited and that we have confidence in. And we'll click Add. That will create the validation record, and we can say yes. You'll see that that screen behind refreshed, and now it says the correct date time for the edits that we had just applied, or the validation that we just applied. Our level is final, so that means that if somebody saw something on the 2nd of September that they wanted to change, we would have to delete that validation. I'll show you how to do that shortly. You can always come into this window to see what the current status is. What it shows you is the most recent validation. So when it says station monitors last validations, that's the most recent data that's been validated. So if a final editor had done December 2010 as a final, that would be there. If a preliminary editor came in and did January 2011, this would then say preliminary January 2011 as the date stamp. So that's one way to review the validation data. No validations have been done on Scotia Street. Another way is to edit the validation. This is just a way to review the validation. In fact, there's a better way. Under Reports, Edit History Validation Report, where we can click on Ellen and look for this month to see if there's been any final or preliminary edits. We can enable a graph effect. So this shows us the edit that was done, or the validation that was applied. Not really any graph when there's only one point, of course, but there's a graphical representation of the data that's been validated versus what's not been validated. The idea behind the graph is that you can print out the month for a series of stations and monitors and determine what work you might be looking forward to. If you're working in a way that preliminary editors validate data, that will be your signal as a final editor to authorize that validation. So that validation report with the graph effect, which unfortunately is not looking very good here, try to do it for a longer period of time. Yeah, it's not, doesn't have enough information here to show a really good graph, but it will give you like a timeline, a bar chart that comes out in with each row on the graph being a parameter at a station, and you'll be able to see the gaps in where edits have been done. So that way, as a final editor, you could see what work you still have to do. So that is how to add a validation, how to edit data, and the basics of reviewing data. I did indicate a brief discussion about calibration correction options. It's kind of tacked on here because I think it's worth talking about every chance we get. But a calibration correction can be done basically three different ways. The first way is if you're just going to correct a zero, subtract a zero, you can come into the edit block and use the calc value to do that subtraction. So the A value would be 1, multiplier of 1, and then minus your 0 value that you received at your calibration. This would allow you to select some data, apply a 0 correction, and just be done. If you need a more detailed ability, an interpolation, you could have those 0 values completed when you do a periodic. You could have a start 0 and an end 0. So when we check this box after we've selected periodic, you'll see that you have a linear equation at the beginning of the time. That's why it's up here, because it's from the start date until this end date. So this way you could interpolate a 0 correction if you needed to. So the first calibration was 1.5, negative 1.5, and the second calibration was negative 0.3 or 2. This would allow you to interpolate those two 0 corrections across the data from these two dates. The last that we've talked about in the past, I think, during webinars, and it probably deserves a webinar itself, is the calibration menu under Edit. It has a corrections option, and this allows you to select calibrations that have been recorded in the system for you to interpolate a correction through. So these would be the automated zero span checks, or somewhat automated calibration, or a manually entered calibration. This allows you to see a demonstration of what the data would look like once it's altered, and then you can authorize it based on the graph. Again, this deserves more of its own webinar. I'll have to look and see if we've done one yet. If not, good candidate right here. So this is another way to do calibration correction. And then the last thing that I had on the document was deleting validation records so that you can apply additional edits. As I mentioned before, if we go into the edit table, we looked at this data for the same period of time. It's all this dark color and we can't do anything to it because it's locked out, it's been validated. So what we can do, if we're in the situation where we need to be able to edit some of that, is we can go into edit validation for Ellen, and we'll pick PM 2.5T for this month, and this one record appears. If we click on that and click remove, it takes that validation set away, so you'll see it's not in the list anymore. And now if we run the edit table again for the same period of time, everything's opened back up for us to make that re-edit that we might need to make, or that adjustment due to new information that we might have seen. So that was a quick 20-minute talk about data validation process. I know it was very, very fast. I did mention that at the end I'd tell you why that validation step is important. And the reason for that is that as we move into using XML Reporter in more and more agencies, one of the features in it will allow you to only send data that's been validated as a streamlining process. So if you validate the data after you've edited it, the XML reporter that will report to either NAPS or EPA will only send the data that's been validated, so you don't have to hunt and peck the date ranges that you know that you've done or that you're confident in. So that'll be a feature that's available as soon as you start using this. Actually, it's a feature in XML Reporter. So I'm going to unmute everybody so you can ask questions now if you have any. There you go. Any questions about the process? Okay, well, I thank you for showing up today. And if you do have any questions, I know that was very fast. It will be posted on the website. Randy's been very good about doing that by the end of the week of the webinars recently, so I hope we can keep that up. And any questions, feel free to call. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dathan.
Thanks.